Good morning, everybody. I'm really grateful to you for, getting out of bed, because frankly, as my team who are sitting here will tell you, I'm not what you might call the first one into the office. So this is a real effort for me, I would say. Seriously, thank you very much. I think one of the things I want to talk about, as you know, is kind of looking at workplace wellbeing, but I'm looking at it from a built environment perspective, and really how you kind of change your environment and buildings to I suppose, ultimately benefit your business, perhaps in terms of productivity, the way you feel about work, and general kind of sort of sense of well-being. But I'm doing that really not because this is my day job, and I'll kind of explain what I do for a day job in a minute, but because I'm absolutely passionate about it as a topic, and I'll kind of give you a sense of that story in a second. So I suppose the first thing to say, and I know there's experts in the room. How many architects? We've got one there. There's others, aren't there? Right, one there. Right, they're the experts. So really, they should be standing here, not some kind of aging PR girl. But the way we work is changing, isn't it? And work needs to keep up. And I think the way you live is changing too. And I suppose if I was to kind of stand here and ask you, how over the last kind of 20 years or so, or last 15 years, some of it like 5 and 10 years, things have changed, I'd be interested in kind of the responses. I mean, who can remember smoking at their desks? Anybody? Right, there's a few. Right, Polly was a gas bag, obviously. Did you smoke away? Yes. Okay. Who remembers kind of just the banks of boring desks and typewriters? Anybody here? Come on, there's people not being honest. Okay, right. They're still there. Right, I think it's interesting because my day job is in sort of industrial and kind of technical comms, and I go to some clients' offices and I just can't believe what places people work in. And Ryan's kind of nodding there. And you think, how do people kind of feel inspired to get up and come to work? And I know we all have to earn a living, but I think that the thing that's interesting at the moment is that employers, businesses, people, small business owners, I think are starting to really kind of rethink how they make the environment work for the people that work for them, or indeed for themselves. And I think thank God it's happening. But that change is in play. So I suppose the thing that I think is that workplaces are really they're very much more dynamic. And I'm going to use an annoying phrase in a minute, which is they're becoming more human-centric. And phrases like that we use and bandy around in our day jobs, me and my team over there. But it's about being kind of tuned to the people that use the space. And that might be about how you lay things out. It might be about whether you give people a view. It might be the lighting. But it's about tuning in to kind of people's needs, really. And I think that's a good thing. And I think the other thing that's worth saying is there will be people sitting here thinking, oh, well, I just run a business in West Wiltshire. What does this mean to me? Because surely this is just the stuff of IBM and Google. Well, I'll tell you, IBM is doing this. We've got friends at IBM. We know they're doing this. We know that Google's doing it because that's in the press. We know that big construction companies are doing these projects. But the thing is that actually this is happening in small businesses too. And I really want you to understand that, because I don't know if there's anybody here who has a life in a big organisation. Well, actually, there's one lady there I know who's a friend of mine. But whether anybody else here is working in very big businesses, I don't know. But for those of you in small businesses or micro businesses, this is relevant and you need to take note. So if we go back to this kind of lovely phrase about kind of human-centric, kind of people tune, it's about just kind of making the building, if you like, the built environment, it's a happier, kind of healthier place for the people that are in it. And why do you do that? Well, okay, there's business case for this. It's about staff turnover, reducing that. It's about productivity, and it's about the sort of the general kind of good vibes around your business. If you think that I'm nuts, which is entirely you're at liberty to think what you like, really, the figures that are out there at the moment are absolutely unbelievable. There's an organisation which is the basically one of the kind of the global building institutes, well-building institutes, and they calculate that the kind of the corporate well-being and wellness industry is worth $40 billion. Now, okay, I accept that some of that could be kind of ping pong tables in boardrooms and all that nonsense, but this is big. So if you think it's not happening, if you think it's not relevant to you, it's there, okay? So the question is, does it really matter? Does this topic really matter? Well, I would argue on a personal level, and I'll tell you why in a minute, yes, it flipping does. And I would be interested to know whether you would all kind of agree with that. I mean, who would agree that, sort of looking at the stats and what I've said to you, who here feels that kind of making your built environment better for your people and your team and yourself is a positive thing? As one hand, right, oh my God, okay, right, okay, so we all agree. Right, so I agree wholeheartedly. Yes, it matters because we spend so much time at work and a third of our lives, I think it's 50% of our day, something like that. We have got other figures, but I mean, that's fairly alarming, isn't it, really? So on that basis, I want to tell you a couple of sort of personal stories about why I'm talking to you on this very topic. So the first one, I suppose, starts on a very long night, and I'll have to apologise to my team who hear me telling the same old thing time and time again. But how long ago was it? Last August, my father was ill, and we didn't know why. He went to hospital, and he'd clearly had a TIA, a stroke. And I stood by his bedside in Swindon Great Western Hospital for 14 hours, waiting for attention, waiting for help. Now, I don't really have a problem with Swindon Hospital. What I have a problem with is the design of A&E. Because I stood there with my father, and I could not tell you whether I was standing there at 3 in the morning, which I did, or 3 in the afternoon, which I did. And I think that's wrong, because there was no light and there was no sense of the time of day. So all your rhythms, your circadian rhythms, your kind of bionic rhythm, absolutely blasted. It was stressful, it was unpleasant, but my God, the built environment that we were in was awful. The lighting was shocking. And then I started to kind of look around at the nursing staff who were there on the night team, working very hard, I hasten to add. But I looked at them. Physically, they were not what you'd expect from the NHS's, finest staff. A lot of them looked physically extremely out of condition, being blunt. I mean, I know I'm no kind of, svelte oil painting, but my word, they really looked ill. And when I looked again at the lighting, because I come from a background I'll tell you about in a minute, I just couldn't believe what they were expected to work in. So if they're expected to work in those situations, how are the patients expected to feel well in that environment? So it really shocked me. So I started to kind of think in those 14 hours, and I started to think about how buildings and people kind of fit together, really. And I started then to think, well, you know what, I've had quite an interesting kind of few months, really, because we moved our business here, Content Comms, which is my day job. We have a couple of offices here, and we did that in November 2 years ago, next week, I think. And since doing that, since moving out of central Bristol, where it's taken me up to 3.5 hours to get half an hour down the motorway every day, 26 miles from home, I'd kind of really freed up my life. I'd suddenly got all this time. I can remember talking to Ed and Katie, who were my lovely neighbours who run all of this here, one day, and they said, "Oh, you're off home." It was 6 o'clock. I said, "Yeah." I said, "I have no idea what you do when you get home at 6:30 at night. I haven't got home at 6:30 at night since I was probably about 21 and a graduate." So suddenly, by moving to the country, moving out of Bristol, not sitting in a car all day, being in a really beautiful environment, having an office that looks at that, suddenly my head was clearer, suddenly I felt better, suddenly I stopped being revolting at home, stressed, unpleasant. So I started to kind of really think about how important our personal environments are to us. And I have a sort of personal crusade, really, which has led to sort of the next part of the conversation, which is to really to try and get everybody in the mix, whether you're running a business, whether you're designing, like our friends who are architects here, whether you're designing spaces for businesses, whether you're thinking about, or whether you're providing spaces for business. We've got our lovely landlords here and our general manager, Tom. You know, whether it's all about kind of making the built environment just work better for the people that have to use it. So what I did was I started to kind of have some thoughts about what we could do with my kind of content comms business, which specialises in technology, built environment and stuff like that. And I thought maybe we could do a publication, maybe we could do something to educate our friends, stakeholders, clients, whatever, better about this topic. So I thought, oh, we'll do a book, something like that. And then I thought to myself, no, that isn't enough, you know. And I kind of went away from the idea, and I ended up having a sort of engaging the help of my good friends here. Give them a wave. From Lightbulb, Ross and Ryan. Can you give them 2 waves whilst I have a drink of water? And I said to the guys who've run an excellent web and digital agency and creative agency, I said, look, I've got this idea, but I don't know what to do with it. I want to do something that really kind of promotes how we make positive changes and catalyse positive change in the built environment. And they had a number of ideas, but what really kind of came out of that conversation was a fantastic idea for a brand, which was Work in Mind, and that's entirely them. I didn't think of that. And then what we did was I had the idea really to create something which was a sort of effectively a content platform, an online place where people can go who are interested in this topic, and that's why I'm here today with my Work in Mind hat on. So what we're kind of really on a mission to do with the Work in Mind project, which I have to tell you I'm running entirely, it's not even on not-for-profit, it's literally out of a back pocket basis. This is entirely something we've delivered out of the goodness of our hearts at Content Comms, or me, whatever. But we're on a mission really to try and stimulate conversation around buildings and people, because I think that really does lead to kind of better business, but more importantly from a personal perspective, it's better for you. So I think this is a fairly shocking statement. I can't even pretend. You know, spend 90% of our time indoors. Now for somebody like myself who's a dog walker, we have a few who are the dog walkers here. I mean, how much better do you feel when you walk the dog, for example? You do, don't you? I mean, or if you walk your kids to school or something like that. It's better to get outside. I mean, look at what we have here. We've got 32 acres, haven't we? We've got a National Trust property across the road, which is downright beautiful. You know, you can be somewhere like this if you're very fortunate, like we are, and get out if you're at work. But you know what? I've worked in the grubbiest bits of central Bristol and still kind of pounded the streets to try and get a bit of space at lunchtime. And the reason it's important is because it just makes you feel better. And I think the really interesting thing is I'm going to share with you some fairly depressing statistics, actually. And I was really toying with not putting these in here, but as I've got to fill so much time, she says, you know, I think it's important to kind of to look at them. But if you think about kind of your work life, and if you ever think to yourself, oh, I've had a really, really bad day, and you start to think about why that is, I'll bet you it's not always the boss being revolting. I'll bet you it's not always the client. Sometimes it's just about how much time, as I said to my colleagues yesterday, you spent staring 14 inches in front of your face, looking at your screen. That's not really a very healthy place to be, is it? But the really interesting thing is it's very easy when you feel something to think that you feel it's just you. But you know what? It isn't. There was some really interesting research that came out very, very recently from the BCO, the British Council of Offices. And they said, well, you can read for yourselves, but you know, 17% of people, you know, think that the workspace is diminishing their personal well-being. We've got other statistics which are fairly grim, but I mean, they'd kind of, you know, put into their report stuff from the HSE, the Health and Safety Executive, about kind of lost days within business, and they'd started to kind of put some calculations together. But it's just really interesting how organisations like the BCO are starting to calculate the impact of buildings and well-being on the people that use them. And I think that's fairly shattering. It'd be very interesting. How many people here from the glove factory all have worked at the glove factory? Right, so a fair old chunk of us, all right. I mean, this is a difficult question in front of our lovely landlords, but I mean, would you all agree? How do I ask this in an open-ended way? I mean, for those of us who kind of use this place, have offices here, how would you feel about this space and kind of well-being? I mean, is it positive? Yep, we're getting some good nods. Good, okay. So spaces that have this kind of look and feel, fantastic. Now, as I say, I appreciate we're not all that fortunate. But I think what I'd like you to sort of think about before we kind of get on to the next sort of section of the chat is, if you weren't here right now, where might you like to be? So let me ask you that. I mean, who would be, I don't know, let's say walking the dog. That's a good one. Yeah, okay, right, we've got a few of those. Where else, if you weren't here, would you like to be? Because I think this is an interesting question, because if you think about it, sometimes when you imagine where you'd like to be right now, it can influence what you might like the rest of the day to look like. And that's really kind of where we're kind of heading with this. Come on, let's have some thoughts on, don't say anything rude because we're on video.
Coast on the beach.
Yeah, coast on the beach, we can do that. Yep, any other? We go?
In the mountains.
In the mountains, so we're getting lots of outdoors things. Is anybody feeling they'd like to be indoors? Right, where would you want to be, Tom? In bed. I was about to say I'd like to be there with you, but I mean I didn't mean it in a deeply caveat that.
It's not going to affect my day, but it's going to affect a 7-month-old child.
Yeah.
3 a.m. for 2 hours.
It's all right. I mean the next stage is quite boring in this presentation, so you can have a little snooze. But I've got no problem with that. I think it's an important thing to kind of to try and work out, isn't it? It's kind of what sort of space what sort of things do you like doing? Because I think that kind of can influence how we try and kind of change the way that we think about buildings. And as I say, I'm very conscious that we have people here who provide built environment spaces for people to work in. I'm very conscious we have people who design built environment spaces. But my kind of sort of call to you really is to try and, in whatever you're doing, is to try and be bold about how you kind of reimagine and rethink your perceptions of working environments. Because if somebody had told me 5-10 years ago that I could have been this happy and this contented and I could do that in my home county by being here, then I would have said that there was nowhere, that it wasn't possible. But I suppose I did dare to reimagine, and actually Nick and Alex, who've kind of created this space, actually dared to reimagine how an environment could be and look what they've created. But let's think about how this reimagining might work. Now, I'm not an architect, and I'm not a designer, and I'm not a manufacturer of lighting systems or anything like that. I'm somebody who is a professional communications consultant who is on a mission. So I'm not going to start talking about techie stuff. That's not what I'm able to do. But what I want to try and do is to take some of the sort of the areas that the industry, the global kind of well-being and wellness industry is looking at, and then try and sort of give some ideas about why we need to think about all of these areas, and then perhaps some sort of positive, easy win things that you could do in your own environments to enact and catalyse change. Now, for the architects here, they will know that there actually are some really interesting and now fairly well established standards, building standards. There's one called the Well Standard, which exists to look at all of these kind of facets of the built environment. So, sleep, forget the sleep thing, but things like comfort, which is your, temperature and air and acoustics and things like that. And those are fantastic, because they're being taken up by really big organisations, people like Google and Skanska, the building company, and IBM and stuff like that. But for smaller businesses, I think we can kind of look at how those big building standards work and what's in the detail, and then we can think, well, okay, if we were to strip out all the guff, how could we kind of pick and choose a few bits and pieces that we could kind of make a difference in our own environments? So I thought I might start off with, you know, the ubiquitous kind of nature, natural world image. This is really to kind of talk about the whole kind of biophilia thing, which I'll sort of explain in a minute. But they do say, and our architect friends probably can back this up with some good data, but kind of exposing people to even just images like that actually result in sort of a de-stressing, if you like, a deep breathing kind of response from individuals. It's a very I think it's a very primeval, it's a very, very primeval thing. But I really think that kind of connection between individuals and nature matters, and I'm not on my own. If you want to kind of understand what biophilia, which is a word I think you're going to start to see everywhere. If any of you are over on LinkedIn, I've noticed that the amount of mentions of kind of nature in the workplace and biophilia are blinking everywhere at the moment. But biophilia is that kind of, well, I think this is a beautiful kind of way of describing it. It's this impulse to connect with nature. And I think that you can make it part of your space. I mean, you know, look out the window, go and have a walk round. So why is that important? Well, look at the statistics. This is actually with some stats that were picked up by CBRE, who are, how do you describe them, Tom? You're ex-property, big commercial property landlords. If you don't know who they are an organisation to be reckoned with, and this is not kind of nonsensical data. But I mean, I'm not going to kind of read it out loud because I'm assuming everybody here has got their contact lenses in and can read it. But just look at the impacts. I mean, it's phenomenal, and I think that's, you know, of a significance that we need to factor in. Now, that doesn't mean to say that we need all to find an office somewhere like this. I mean, there aren't enough, you know. I don't want you kind of, you know, trying to Bagsy my office after when it comes up in a year's time. But you know, what you need to do really is to think about things that you could do in your business, perhaps that would kind of bring nature into the environment. And I had a really good story or an example of this the other day, which was thanks to Ryan over there, we got introduced to a firm of architects in Bristol called Alec French and another organisation called Hydrock, who are a big mechanical engineering consultancy, both very, very well-known businesses in the southwest. And they were saying that, well, actually the guy from Hydrock was saying one of the things that they used to do in their big, smart, swanky, corporate-y looking Bristol offices was they used to pay a man, well, they pay a company, I should say, to provide plants for the building. You know, those classic, you know, when you go into your classic office, there's always the plant by reception, isn't there, and something looking green by the photocopier. And that actually, having worked in a building where that sort of thing happens, and actually having paid in a previous life, in my previous company, we used to pay somebody to come in and look after those plants and provide them. It's blinking expensive, and you know, that little man turns up once a week with his watering can, all that nonsense. And what Hydrock did, this company I was just chatting about just now, they actually stopped that budget like that, and what they did was they took that money, let's say it was a couple of grand, I've no idea what it was, and they divvied it up and they said to everybody in the building, right, we've got, I don't know, 2,000 quid. If you want 20 quid to go down to the farmer's market at lunchtime in Bristol, in Corn Street, or you want to go to the garden centre, we'll give you some money to go and buy yourself some plants, and you can have them on your desk, you can put. And they weren't sure whether this would work, but they said what actually ended up happening was that people got really engaged in it. They loved it. So they started to have kind of competitions, you know, whose chili plant grew, you know, kind of was the sort of, you know, the ultimate chili, who could grow kind of, you know, lemons on the Wednesday afternoon or whatever. But it was really, really positive. And these are a bunch of engineers, so it's not like they're a bunch of wafty creatives like most people in this room, but she says, hoping I don't get stabbed on the way out. But So things like that, can make a difference. Now, you don't need 2,000 quid to do that if you're running a small business, but the point is they actually noted just how much happier. They did some surveys. I think measurement is really interesting. They did some surveys of kind of staff engagement and all that kind of thing. And they were really, really positive. And they said, this was worth doing. People were kind of happier as a result. So this is a subject that's really, really close to my heart, and that's because light is everything, isn't it? I come from a background, as I said, of sort of technical comms and marketing, and I've spent probably the last 15, 16 years, please, I don't look it, doing comms with my team here on for the lighting industry. So we look after some big lighting manufacturers, we look after people who make lighting control systems, so things that kind of dim lights like this down. We've looked at the kind of the energy and sustainability of light and all sorts. And one of the things that I've noticed over the years, and that's why I was so upset by this experience in Swindon's hospital, is that lighting, so we've got natural light coming in now, and we've got artificial light, and the two things can work in harmony, and they should work in harmony. And what happens is that people think lighting is a case of just, put the light bulb in. It really isn't, she says, knocking the place about. It really isn't. It's a very, very technical sell from the manufacturer's perspective, and it's a really important thing to understand. But you know what? My God, it matters so much how you put attention into the whole lighting strategy, and I know that sounds a bit up itself, but we'll come back to that. But you've really got to think about the impact of light on you, your team, and everybody around you. Bad lighting is a killer. I'm telling you that. I mean, I'm sadly not standing next to my computer where I've got all sorts of hidden notes, but the statistics around impacts of poor lighting in hospitals, poor lighting on night shift workers. Has anybody here ever worked a night shift? Good, right. Perhaps we can come back to that. I mean, it's phenomenal. I saw something when I was preparing my statistics for this, that night shifts and are now seen as I think it's by the it was by one of the kind of the global kind of health organisations, might have even been the World Health Organization. They saw night shift as a carcinogen. In other words, it's so poisonous to our systems because our biorhythms are so upset by not having access to daylight that it's seen as a real kind of priority area. But if you work with even a good electrician, or if even just do some reading up, you can make really positive changes to your office, or your warehouse. I mean, I have no idea whether you're all working in offices or what, but my God, this is an important topic. But great lighting, good, modern, efficient, LED lighting really can make such a difference. That's because actually you can tune, a bit like a piano, you can tune LED lighting to suit different times of day. So if you've got a lovely morning like this, light can kind of flood in here, and you can kind of dim down what you've got here, and you can make changes that work better with what they call your kind of circadian rhythms, your natural biorhythms, and that is a really important topic. But why is it important? Well, actually, because you can calculate the impact that has on efficiency and individual efficiency. And there's a really fantastic organisation who are a bit like a trade body, really, industry kind of lobbying body called the UK Green Building Council. I think this statistic ultimately actually comes from the World Green Building Council, and these guys are using it. But better lighting makes an improvement, they reckon, of around 23%. Now, if I was you, I'd say, well, what does better mean? Well, I would say modern, efficient LED lighting, actually, specifically. Those fluorescent things are a killer, and if you've got them anywhere, get rid of them. If you look at some of the statistics around kids in schools, which I'm happy to share with people, on an individual basis, it's really frightening, actually, how many schools, particularly the classic ones like I went to when I was at junior school, classic Victorian high-ceiling schools, they've all got those fluorescent 5-foot lights in. issues around flicker, glare, they cause headaches, they reduce concentration levels. It's really very frightening indeed. And I think if you've got kids in a school, next time you go in for parents' evening or whatever you're going for, I would just have a little look up. And I'll tell you something, if anybody is worried about that, and their kids are in the state system, there are so many ways for schools to make improvements to their lighting without having to pay a penny for it. And you can come and ask me about that, because that's another subject entirely. There is no excuse for crap lighting. So, little question, who slept well last night? Oh my God, right, were you not excited? Thank you. Okay, sleep is beyond important. I mean, if I've got kind of a little crusade about light, this is another thing. I think, I love this. One of our lovely writers, Sophie, who lives in the village, found this. This is Elizabethan quote from Elizabethan writer. This, the sleep, the golden chain that ties health and bodies together. How well can you put it? Did you sleep well? Well, I think it's the classic question. But my God, it's important, and this really interests me, because actually it always occurs to me that that if I ever sort of have been camping or slept in a motorhome, whatever, I always sleep better, and I'm fairly sure it's because actually you're nearer to nature, you're nearer to fresh air, the natural ventilation, it all kind of fits together. I mean, has anybody ever kind of found that? If you've ever slept in a tent, yeah, okay, right. And also you get light coming in at the right time of day, don't you? Now, I'm interested in I've put this kind of section on sleep next to light, because actually the sort of light and sleep kind of fits really kind of closely together. But there's been some really interesting stuff in the national press that was kind of that came out of a report, but it was this one actually, the Why Sleep Matters report. It got loads of national press coverage. Not surprised, if I had a PR campaign, we're all nodding, all the comms people down there. If we had a PR campaign with stats like that, we'd be in the bloody Telegraph as well. It's really frightening, and I'd be very happy to send over any of the articles we've kind of written on this with our, to anybody who's interested. But it's full of statistics like this. But there is horrific stuff around impacts on kind of heart health, coronary health, cancer, all sorts. And the reason I'm interested in this from a built environment perspective is because actually how you work with your amount of light you get during a day affects how much you sleep. So if you think that my previous section banged on a bit about the need to really think about light and lighting and using decent quality light and not getting, just accepting any old crap, this is why, because it impacts on how you sleep, and particularly for those of you who've ever done kind of long shifts, night shifts, or you're sitting in front of your laptops, phones, all that blue light coming at you, you've got to rethink that. And as I say, I'm happy to share the stats. This is something else I think is quite scary, and Sam, who's helped me out with some of the images here, has chosen a nice image about kind of distraction. But of course, distractions take all forms. In a built environment perspective, there's been loads of stuff in the press recently, the trade press, about open plan offices and whether or not they're any good. Should we all go back to those kind of little cubicles or separate offices, whatever? And the reason is because actually it's seen now as an area by what they call them environmental psychologists, is the people looking at this. But it's seen as a real area of concern that actually we've kind of gone too far in the way that we lay out spaces. So, and the reason is because people are not kind of all the same. So for those of us who are introverts and those of us who are extroverts, we all kind of work in really different ways. And I think you can think about sort of stuff that you find annoying. I know I'm like the world's worst at getting annoyed, but that's because I'm an only child and I can't cope with other people within 5 feet of me. But they're all like thinking, oh my God, she's telling the truth. But distraction is a real problem, and I would have thought for the architects in the room, it'd be interesting perhaps to get their perspectives on this, about how you lay out spaces and how you rethink spaces to kind of get the best out of people. I mean, we've got a stack of us in there, and actually we've taken on an extra office, which is great for Tom and the team, because that's, you know, good for them. But from our perspective, one of the reasons I took on extra space here was because I was really concerned that if you needed some time to yourself, or you needed to make a phone call, or you didn't want to be distracted, we couldn't do that. So we took on a space where we did have that, and I think that's, you know, that's been good for us. But just what I want you to think about is how, even in a small serviced office somewhere, or, you know, how do you rethink how perhaps you might lay out your desks, or what you might do to help your team feel that they don't have to be distracted all the time. And I think this is pretty horrific. The organisation that did this are actually a very high-end, I think they're American actually, commercial furniture company, but they did some research, and the research kind of goes on a bit in terms of the stats, but this is fairly horrific, that if you're interrupted, it takes you 23 minutes to kind of fully return to what you're doing. And I think with the amount of stuff going on and phone calls and people coming in and, could you just, we all know, we've all been there. Think about, how could you just rethink your working environments to just give yourself time to somewhere to be alone if you need to. And I think the other thing I'd say to you is just remember that not everybody in your team is the same personality as you. There will be people in the room who are, if you were profiled, you'd be classified as extroverts. There are people who would be classified as introverts, and just remember that those words aren't taken in the literal sense when it comes to kind of, management speak. But, we're not all the same. So if you're in an office space like we are, and you're shoving everybody in the same room, for God's sake, just think about, if you're running the show, if it's your company, how could I make something different so that we can provide space for those that just work differently? Because this is a big problem, and if you're interested in it, I can probably point you to some stats. This is another area which I've got a fair bit of kind of background experience in. I'm going to call it the comfort factor, but really it's about heat in buildings. Because we sort of specialise in built environment comms for our content comms business, we work with a lot of companies who are in the sort of building management system space, and that building management systems kind of run the electrical functions in buildings in a very brief way. But we write a lot about kind of the impact of kind of heat and quality of air and stuff like that. But how many of you have ever worked in a space where you thought, oh my God, okay, it's overheated? Yeah, okay. Have you ever been too cold? Anybody? Yeah. So I think the problem with kind of your classic modern building is that, and I sort of, it's an interesting thing for our architects in the room, is often actually people have no control. When I say people, I mean the kind of the classic building users, you and me going to work every day. No control over that space. And I think that's terrible. And it's interesting, about 7 or 8 years ago, maybe more, when I was in Bristol, I said to one of my team, we were looking around again at where to move to. It took us a long time to actually find the right place. And I said, what's the thing that you would most like? And she said, well, clearly it needs to be somewhere I can get to on the bus. And she said, the other thing is, she said, I just want somewhere I can open the window. Okay, so all that member of staff wanted was to be able to open a window and get some air in, because we were actually at the time in the Castlemead building. Do you know that one in Bristol? Yeah, it looks like one of those kind of ghastly sort of 80s skyscraper-y type thing, well, Bristol style, 16 floors. But you had no control over that environment whatsoever. We were either too hot, too cold, and we were mostly grumpy and miserable. It was a really unhappy environment, and very unproductive actually. I think our business, when I was in that company, was on the real like that, and I blame it a lot on that kind of physical environment. But I would say one of the things that you can do, I mean, the architects will, and he will be able to tell you all about this, is that giving people kind of personal control over their environments in some small way makes a really massive difference. So these days, you've got all sorts of kind of systems, some which kind of manage heat and things like that. But if you were, for example, commissioning, let's say perhaps you had you were converting a building in the back of your garden or something like that for yourself and a couple of members of staff, and you're running a small business or whatever, perhaps just think about having a thermostat on the wall. We've got one in our room, which is great, because we know the windows, we can change the heat, but just think about the fact that it's important. We've got a client actually who have a really fantastic building in Holland that they built themselves. They're quite a big business, 90 million euros, something like that, big company. But they did a survey of their staff when they built the building to see what was the optimal heat that their staff liked working at. It was 21.5 degrees, I remember it very clearly. And the managing director, the owner of the business, it's a family-run business, personally led that research to find out how people work best. And it reduced absenteeism, illness. You wouldn't believe the impacts. And they measured that when they compared it to their kind of previous building. I think this is really interesting. The other day on Twitter, when just after we sort of set up Work in Mind, I was trying to kind of gather some stuff for an article we wanted to do, and I said, put a call out to architects and people in the built environment. And I said, what easy wins are there that you can in terms of well-being in a built environment perspective? What are the most important things that you can give people? And without question, every response that I had the words day and light in it. So daylight was seen as the most important thing actually by the what they call the specification, the architects, kind of the design end of the process. And I wanted, for everybody in the room, how many people would put access to daylight as a kind of a critical part of their desire for a work? Yeah, okay, so it's almost all of us. So daylight couldn't be more important. And the other thing is a view. It's what we all want. And actually, I think that's pretty interesting. So people want to have a view. That's great. But it doesn't have to be one like that. I've worked in kind of rooftop garrets in Bristol, and it's still been something to look at other than a blank wall. But the impact of that on things like sleep, and of course sleep impacts on health, absolutely unbelievable. I just wanted to shove this in here because clearly, I can't stand here with that behind me and not have this on the slide. So this is actually from the engineering consultancy, WSP, a very, very well thought of business, I have to tell you. But these stats are pretty horrific. But just getting off your bum at lunchtime and going for a bit of a wander around. I've started in the last kind of this autumn just nipping out here or going to the courts, the National Trust property across the road, and my God, that has improved my kind of afternoon moods and ability to concentrate and be productive massively. As we're kind of not too far off kind of the 10 to 9 point, I just want to just share with you the business case for doing this, because if any of you are out there and you're trying to think about what you do with your own businesses, you've got to understand that it makes a difference. And it's interesting because I have spent many, many years talking about sustainability and energy efficiency and stuff like that. And people always say, oh, it must be really easy to sell the whole energy efficiency message. And I'll tell you, well, it is, but actually it's only you can only get businesses to invest in energy efficiency if they know that there's a benefit. One of those benefits, it saves money. The business case for this isn't just about that kind of lovely huggy stuff, it's about cash actually. There's some unbelievable figures around kind of the ability to, if you make your building a greener one, a weller one, a more healthy one, a more human-centric one, the big thing is around kind of how it helps you to kind of attract staff and retain staff because people are happier, and it's about health and productivity. So this is a big thing, and actually really big corporates are looking at this. And I had a long conversation with IBM and their real estate team not long ago, and they are now rolling this out across their estate. And guess why? Because they're worried about millennials and that kind of generation of people who've got lots of choice about where they work. And they want to have the best environment, the best spaces, because they need to attract and retain talent because it costs so much to acquire an individual and train them, and then if you lose them because they don't like the building or they don't like the office, that's a problem. So if you look at the kind of the sort of the satisfaction kind of output, it's pretty impressive, and that's undeniable. From a sort of productivity perspective, you can really boost it. Now, University College London and Atkins are massive, the architects will know, massive consultancy. But this is a fairly interesting statistic. You know, an extra 20 billion in GDP if buildings were more kind of human-centred. What more do you need to know from a business perspective? So the other thing I would say is that, you know, investing in this is actually, it can boost your corporate identity. Now, I know when we write job ads for our business, we always reference the beautiful environment in which we work, because for me, it's a reason somebody would come and work here. And even if you were IBM or a massive company, the same would be true. Think about that kind of internal environment and kind of how it makes people see you and how it makes your customers see you as well. It's the sort of thing people like to know about you. They want to know that. The other thing is, I don't know if anybody here owns, well, obviously there's one or two, I know, but you know, owns a property portfolio or owns their own building, even if it's a small one somewhere, but it really does actually, it's starting to make a difference to the value add. And I know it would be nice if this figure was a bit higher, but again, this is from WSP, but there is now kind of measurable, tangible evidence to suggest that if you've got a healthy building, you've invested in it, it does actually make a difference to the value of that built environment from an investment perspective. And that is the problem, because a lot of our architect friends will tell us that it's all very well doing all this, but will people pay for it? Will the customer pay for it? Because, you know, things get kind of squeezed out. And that's a really good argument. So I'm going to finish up there and we can have a few questions. But my message really to everybody here is I think we all deserve better, and I think you should demand more. And when I say demand more, I think you should demand more. If you're working for somebody, I think, you know, you can have a nice conversation about perhaps how the space looks. If you're running a business like I do, think about what sort of environment do you think it's acceptable for your team to work in, and how that looks and feels. And I think, as just kind of generally, I think it's up to all of us somewhere, whether you're the architect, the designer, the end user, the landlord, whatever, or just, you know, looking for an office. It's up to all of us to think about how do we make change happen in a good way, and how do we influence that, and what do we demand? And if we don't ask for more, if we don't demand more, if we don't want more, it's not going to happen, is it? So that's my kind of final message to you.